Hello guys, it's Excel and welcome back to another Block Story Top 10 list. Back in 2015, I made a video listing the hardest bosses in Block Story, but that was back in version 10. A lot has changed since then and that list is pretty much outdated by now. That video did extremely well and I'm glad you all liked it. By popular request, I've decided to update that video. This video will be covering all of the current bosses in the game, including the new ones in version 13. So without further ado, let's get started. These are the top 10 hardest bosses in Block Story. Coming in at the bottom of this list is Aragog. I'm sure most of you were expecting this to be at the very bottom or at least near it. Ever since the release of version 10, Aragog has been nerfed to oblivion and is one of the easiest enemies to kill in the game. He doesn't do that much damage to the player even when the player is wearing no armor, and he has such a small health bar. Oftentimes he might damage himself from jumping and falling from too high. Do I really have to say more about this boss? Yes, he can be scary and make you jump scare when you first meet him, but he isn't much of a threat at all. I really need to be more careful though. Oh god! Oh my god! At number 9 we have the Trex. Quite possibly one of the most annoying bosses in the game if you choose to build a shelter in the forests or grassy plains. You will be seeing him a lot. Despite being a Trex, he doesn't pose that much of a threat to the player. He can easily be avoided and it doesn't move very quick at all. He doesn't do that much damage to the player, but what makes him a bigger challenge than Aragog is that he has a little bit more of a health bar. It's also a smaller target, making it a little bit more difficult to hit as well. But other than that, he doesn't really pose much of a threat to the player. He's about as weak as an actual T-Rex's arms. Great job living up to your potential, T-Rex. You're making your ancestors proud. Next up we have Hydra, one of the more uncommon bosses in the game who has a fairly unique design to it. For one, it has 3 heads and 1 tail, which leaves me wondering which head controls the tail. Have you ever thought of that? I often get questions where this boss spawns and the answer is near the rivers, in forests, grassy plains, or the Forgotten Sky. Just like the previous 2 bosses, Hydra doesn't necessarily pack that big of a punch. It just has a slightly bigger health bar than the previous 2 bosses. However, this one can spawn in swamp snakes. So if you happen to be on that quest that involves killing those swamp snakes, you could just look for a Hydra and let him spawn in those snakes. Alright, it's time for some of the bigger threats. Ashkore takes number 7. Ashkore is one of the strongest dragons in the whole game. He does enough damage to 2-shot most new players. On top of that, he's completely resistant to electric attacks and the tentacle staff. This means that the angelic swords, the trident, and the world breaker are all useless to this thing. On top of being resistant to a lot, he does a moderate amount of damage to the player that will scare most new players away. He has a massive health bar, which means you'll be fighting him for a while compared to most previous bosses I mentioned above. Without a doubt, Ashkore will be the toughest enemy you will fight in the Forgotten Sky, and he might be one of your first biggest tests of your strength in the game. Don't be fooled, the Dark Boss is easily one of the strongest creatures in the whole game. He does some of the strongest damage in the game at a very fast rate. So why is he number 6? Well, there are a few things holding the Dark Boss back from his full potential. For one, the Dark Boss is weak against electricity, which most of the other bosses are resistant to. He burns when he gets too close to light or falls in lava, which is strange to me because the underworld is filled with lava, and he flees when he gets to low health. No other boss flees or burns when it gets to low health. Ignoring these, he still has a lot of health and has a deadly quick attack dealing hundreds of damage every second the player chooses to get close to him. The Dark Boss may have a few weaknesses here and there, but that doesn't stop it from being a huge threat to all players that come across him. Yes, this time Shiva isn't number 1 on the list, but don't worry, she's still just as menacing and dangerous as she originally was. For starters, Shiva can only be found in the jungle biomes far away from spawn, which guarantees that she will have a massive health bar and do a ton of damage. Not only that, she can also spawn in dragon bats to help support her and distract any of your pets that you tried to summon to help you out against this giant frog. She leaps around and attacks very quick, making it very difficult to hit her. There's only one thing that's setting Shiva back, and that is that she can damage herself now when she jumps. Her leaps are sometimes a little bit too high and she can end up hurting herself from fall damage. But nothing necessarily too big or game changing will affect that fight experience. Shiva is easily one of the hardest bosses in the game, and her size will be sure to throw you off guard. At number 4, we have everyone's favorite ghostly boss, Maddie. Maddie has terrorized players since the beginning of their adventure, always watching from a distance, ready to strike if anyone gets too close. Everything about Maddie is just so awesome. Being the only boss that is completely resistant to guns, dark magic, and sword damage, this boss welcomed a new gameplay style for taking out bosses in block story. Players were forced to use elemental damage in order to take out Maddie. This sounds simple enough, but Maddie teleports more often than most other creatures do, making her hard to target if you try to play it passive and use a bow. She has the ability to float through solid blocks, which will allow her to sneak up on the player when they think they are safe inside of their very own home. She also does an insane amount of damage that will have all players trying to keep their distance from her. Maddie has proven herself to be one of the strongest, yet coolest and most mysterious creatures in the block story world, and she will continue to terrorize all players in space as well. Out of all the bosses in the game, I found it pretty easy to place them on this list. However, this one made it really difficult. Coming in at number 3 is the Phoenix. It's honestly hard to place the Phoenix boss because the way you fight it is much different than any other boss in the game. You need to locate its egg on layer 4 of space, then you need to destroy it to summon the boss. The Phoenix will spawn in at level 1 and have a tiny health bar and do only a moderate amount of damage. Once the Phoenix has been killed, it will spawn back into its egg and you will have to break it again. This time it will spawn in 5 levels higher at level 6 and do a little bit more damage and have a little bit more health. The goal is to repeat this process several times and try to get it to level 70, where the Phoenix will drop fire each time it is killed. As the fight progresses and you start to get closer to reaching level 70, that's where the Phoenix really starts to become a threat. For one, the Phoenix has the ability to shoot up to 10 fireballs at you at once. And once this boss starts to reach those higher levels, these will do a ton of damage, which will surely take out anyone who has 1500 HP or lower at once, if they are unlucky enough to get hit by all these fireballs at once. The Phoenix is also resistant to fire and electricity, so you might be better off using a tentacle staff, magic arrows, the crystal sword, or a gun. This boss fight can technically go on all the way up to level 200, which I haven't managed to successfully do just yet. My record is around 191, which just goes to show that the Phoenix is definitely one of the strongest bosses in the game. The reason why this boss isn't any higher on the list is when you do summon this boss out of the egg, it is vulnerable for a few seconds before it actually starts attacking and flying towards you. This allows for you to easily land some strong hits before the fight really begins. This is why I felt that putting it in at number 3 would be the best spot for it. Yes, the Dragon Lord is number 2. The original endgame boss has proven itself well, and he knows how to put up a great fight. The Dragon Lord has the ability to summon Paula's lost dragon, Zordaxis, and 3 other dragons, including Ashkore, which makes trying to fight the Dragon Lord head-on a real chore. There is always so much going on when you have to fight the Dragon Lord. Not only do you have to watch out for the 4 dragons, you also have to avoid his powerful fireballs, which were buffed in the last update. They look really tiny, but actually do hundreds of damage. He also has the ability to heal himself if you are not engaging in the fight. On top of all of this, version 13 decided to buff him. Back then he was limited to being only level 100, now he can be up to level 200 depending on your distance from spawn. Without a doubt, the Dragon Lord has reclaimed his throne at being one of the strongest bosses in the game, but there can only be one on top. I'm sure most of you watching by now know who the top boss is. Without further ado, here's number 1. Coming in at number 1 is Tedboat! No, come on. You guys all know what number 1 is. It's the Swamp Golem. There's no denying it. When comparing this boss to all the other bosses in the game, it has just about every advantage going in its favor. No matter the level, it does more damage than any other bosses in the game. The lowest amount of damage I've seen it do so far is just under 1,100, and that's with the best armor on. He also has more health than any other boss in the game. My first fight with this thing lasted almost 10 minutes because of that health bar. Two of these guys can also spawn in at once to add to the difficulty of trying to aim just for one of them. Oh yeah, electricity heals them so you can't use the World Breaker or Angelic Swords. He one-shots most pets so you can't really use them either. And if you're just a player starting to get into space, I would highly recommend avoiding these things unless you have at least 2,000 health and plenty of magic damage or Phoenix Swords at the ready. This is easily the hardest boss in the game, no doubt about it. And there you have it, all the block story bosses ranked from easiest to hardest. Do you agree with this list? Let me know down in the comment section below. And if you have ideas for more top 5 or top 10 lists, let me know down in the comment section below. As always, I hope you enjoyed this top 10 list, and I'll see you all in the next video.